Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
How are you doing with recovering? You all had a huge weekend in this
Yeah.
resistance movement. How are you
Mhm.
doing?
I'm doing okay. I hit a wall yesterday after our adventure, our second day of adventures,
Yeah.
and kind of got really tired. And then today I hit a wall this morning and took a little nap before lunch. But I'm feeling really refreshed now.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I know that like Saturday, which was the big No Kings rally, across the country, was
Hmm.
huge here in Midland. Just a
Yeah.
real testament to like all of the organizing we've been doing, all of
Yeah.
this work and effort to just try to lead and, create this sort of spaces and recognize kind of all the people in our local, area who are aligned with our kind of ideology, and to have all of those folks show up on Saturday, I'm sure was amazing. I couldn't
Yeah.
come. I got to be on the coordinating group and help kind of behind the scenes, but I ended up having to go to a family event on the actual day. But I was watching. I was following the live
Yeah.
feed, and probably more than I should have at a family event. So I can only imagine what the day of was, like a mix of excitement and exhaustion and all the things. Tell me about it. Fill me in.
Yeah. So I mean, and I will admit I was a little bit nervous going in. We had a little bit of pushback about the fact that we were using drag queens, and so I didn't know, was that going to affect turnout? Was that going to
Yeah.
affect how people responded and absorbed our event? Um, Concerns were unfounded. Absolutely unfounded.
Which is an understatement.
Even some of the people that originally expressed concerns later came back and said, I was wrong and you guys were right. And, thanks for putting that on. It's so much joy in the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
That was really, I spent a lot of my time setting up like the big rally. So I wasn't part of the march and the initial smaller rally. So I was just kind of, setting up, working, getting hot and sweaty and whatever. And when they started coming in and our queens were standing along the way, like cheerleading them and everybody, and then there were a couple hundred people that didn't march and just showed up at the event because, not everybody can march.
Yeah.
So we for sure, and I actually heard that back was like, I will go to more things like this if it's like this where I can come and I don't have to march because I can't. But I was
Mm-hmm.
so glad to be there.
Yeah.
Um,
Intentionally inclusive in that way. That
yes,
was
yes.
really a
Um,
great
and
move.
and I and actually I want to talk about somebody, a professor later on, but that was one of the things they said: making your things more inclusive of all people is a huge part of what we
Here,
need to be
here.
doing.
Yeah.
Um, but it was just so joyful, and I like started getting all teary-eyed watching all these people come in and like, and I discussed this with you a little bit, but it was just so many different people, moms and dads with their kids, moms with their kids, dads with their kids. We had a young lady or a young person that had literal, their hair was in big spikes and they were painted green and they were in all black and chains. And then we also had little old ladies with their walkers and,
Yeah.
just people in red, white, and blue and people in all black that were, there to really, draw attention to the fact that Palestine is an issue we need to be talking about. Just in the signs, everything from Medicaid to Medicare to LGBTQ rights to just the basic, like, no kings, no fascists, no Nazis, that kind of stuff. It was huge and so full of energy. It was just amazing. It was amazing.
That's awesome. I wonder if you could talk a little more about like, 'cause I love hearing that like one of the key emotions of the day was joy. And I know that we got some pushback
Mm-hmm.
uh, when we were kind of communicating about this event, and we were sharing that it was going to be have drag queens and we were going to have kids activities and those kinds of things. Some of the pushback was like, man, this is so serious what's going on in Washington, D.C. with this administration. Like, doesn't kind of showing up and being joyful seem counterintuitive to what's going on? Doesn't it make us look like silly or something?
Hmm.
Versus like the joyfulness that we were trying to convey in our event and actually events across the country. So talk more about this sort of like importance of joy and resistance and how you kind of respond to those folks that say, actually, we should strike a more somber tone in what we're doing.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there's not a place for anger. I mean, there was plenty of anger there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can have serious protests, you can have visuals, there's all sorts of protests, all kinds. And we can meet all of those needs. But joy in resistance and joy in protesting is extremely important because, as you and I know, we get burned out. I mean, that whole event refilled my well, and my well was running super dry. And I know I needed that. And there
Yeah.
are so many other people that were just like, oh, I've just been feeling so depressed, but coming out and seeing all these people, and and then we had singers singing songs from the Suffs musical, and we had the Queens. One, Miss Dahlia Rivers was the MC, and oh my gosh, was she hilarious! She was funny. She was decked out red, white, and blue sequins, like just it was so just patriotic and awesome. And she has this snort when she starts laughing that gives me life. I could just sit there and listen to that and laugh about it all day long, which I think is her intention,
Yeah.
just to get people laughing. But it was hilarious. And it really filled the space. It's an outdoor space, but it filled the space with happiness and joy and like this feeling we can do this. That
Yeah.
not everything is the end of the world, and we can find a way to get through this together.
Yeah. And like there's nothing like demonstrating to like the oppressive like actors, right? That fuck that. We're going to be
Mm-hmm.
joyful. Like we're
Yeah.
going to come together and there's joy in being together with other people. Like how many
Mm-hmm.
people did we have at this rally?
Almost 2,000.
2,000, right? So like the biggest, or at least tied for the biggest gathering of this kind in the history of Midland. And we
Mm-hmm.
came together in a space to say, you know what? I am not going to let you have my joy.
Yeah.
And we're going to find the joy together. And like, we're going to build together this resistance work. And like, there's something like just like multi-layered about resisting the oppressiveness from a place of joy and
Mm-hmm.
community that seems just so powerful, so
Mm-hmm.
powerful. And so I'm just really glad to hear that that was, as intended, right? An
Yeah.
overarching theme of the day.
Yeah. And I think the more joyful your protests are, the less chance you have of violence ensuing.
Yeah, no doubt.
So that's probably a good thing because, just non-violent, peaceful protests have a better chance of succeeding than ones that resort to violence, looting, or rioting in any way.
Totally. Yeah, not that there's not a place for being somber and serious and all
Mm-hmm.
of that as well. And I'm just really glad that as we were doing the planning for this event, that we were very strategic about the kinds of the themes that we wanted,
Mm-hmm.
the folks that we wanted to be involved, how we wanted to talk about it. And despite kind of concerns and pushback otherwise, like it couldn't have been more successful, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yep. And one of the things I loved, so we had numerous speakers. They were all amazing. AG Dana Nessel, she really got the crowd going. She started us off. A lot of great things were said. Brandell Adams from Saginaw and Dr. Pamela Pugh from the Michigan State Board of Ed all said great things. But one of the things that I really loved, Emmy Zanotti, who is with Equality Michigan Action Network, she was just talking about like, we're out here protesting. We don't want kings, but okay, what do we want? What is the future we want to build? Like, let's not just talk about the things we hate or the things we don't like or the things that Trump is doing that are bad. let's contrast that with what is it
Yeah.
exactly we also want to do, which I think is a great message. It's something I have been talking about with people so much. This idea of like, oh, should we be, and you and I've talked about it, should we be more moderate? Should we be more progressive? And my
Yeah.
opinion is we don't know yet, and we will create that narrative. We will create it. So let's work on creating it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It reminds me of, so yesterday we had more events in Midland because we can't can't catch a break ever.
Nope.
And we had one of our candidates for the Michigan Senate up here for an event in Larkin Township. So it was Dr. Abdul Al Saeed coming here, and he talked a little bit about that. Like it was in the question and answer section of his presentation about like kind of not crafting your um, purpose and focus based on whatever polling just came out, but more
Yeah.
like deciding, like basically deciding the world that you want to live in and charting a course to that. And like
Mm-hmm.
true leaders throughout history have done that, and they get
Yeah.
people to like align with that vision, not just kind of like react to whatever poll is going on to align with what kind of currently is happening. And you talked about that in terms of the other side, right? With Trump and kind of focusing on immigration. I think Dr. El Sayed also kind of talked about like how Trump has been able to shift the narrative to be and
Yeah.
pick a pick an enemy, and like you wake up, you go to bed not caring about immigration, and you wake up and it feels like everyone in the world is like that has
Mm-hmm.
become their top issue. And
Yeah.
like Democrats need to figure out how to like figure out how to chart that course to the world that we want to live in and shift our own narrative and thinking
Mm-hmm.
toward that versus like just reacting in the moment to what people are saying is happening now, because that might be different if they had this different vision going on in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I've really been trying to articulate, and I haven't found the perfect language. But then, Abdul was talking about that, Dr. Saeed, and he was really, it was like just kind of saying like similar to what you were just saying, like with the immigration thing, not everybody cared as much about it, but because Trump talked about it and talked about it and talked about it and made it a focal point, we can do the same thing.
Yeah.
And no, we don't have a Trump-like figure, which actually is okay. I'm not interested in a Democratic cult. That's for sure not anything that I'm advocating for. And I actually do get kind of annoyed when it's like, who's the Democratic Trump, or who's the Democratic
Yeah.
Joe Rogan, or who's the, like, I don't really want any of them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's
Mm-hmm.
find our own ways to do this. But I do think we can talk about these issues. And it's not even really creating anything. People already care about healthcare. They
Yeah.
already care about it. They already care about a living wage and all these things that affect their daily lives. We just have to make it the focal point.
Well, sure. And like it from a place of like sincerity and like a real desire to make things better. Like Trump
Mm-hmm.
shifted the narrative on immigration, not because he was sincere about making this
Yeah.
country better for anybody, but he was sincere about, in his own personal kind of retrospect, to make sure that he got power, held on to power, he handed power to others, and ultimately power enriches the folks that are his friends who are already rich. And so like that was his goal, and immigration is the perfect foil for that because it has a built-in enemy. It's
Yeah.
got built-in like excuse about everything that's going on in your life, and we have someone now to blame.
Mm-hmm.
um and I think what we're saying is like we can do that on the Democratic side, but we can do that to actually not to ingratiate and build riches for people who are already rich and powerful, but to for the sake of everyday lives of Americans who can
Mm-hmm.
get better, right? So we can shift the narrative, like, and have everybody wake up tomorrow and have healthcare be like the main issue, and actually make lives better from a sincere place if we can
Yeah.
kind of do that right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, well, two things. I've been like reading and watching and hearing way too many things. But there's a new group called Represent Us. So actually I don't know if they're new. I've only recently, they're new to me. Jennifer Lawrence, the actress, is a spokesperson for them. And they're really talking about the problems with our government itself. And one of the things that they talked about, and I don't remember the study. There was a study cited in this. I'd have to go look it back up. But they looked at if 0% of Americans cared about an issue, the legislature of our country was about 30% likely to enact any legislation on that 0% issue of concern. If Americans were 100% in favor of an issue or cared 100% about an issue, the legislature was still 30% likely to enact legislation. So that's one thing I just want to talk about. And it has a lot to do with corruption and corporate money and politics. Like, that's a huge issue that has to be settled. We have got to wrestle our government back from corporations and the wealthiest people in America.
Well, no, yeah, because we're like a freaking representative democracy. Like, what you just shared is absolutely the antithesis of the very foundation of our country and our, the government that was established for it. And the irony is that the folks who claim to be the most patriotic are the ones that would support a system like that, I mean, common sense gun legislation is a perfect example of this, where like it's clear and clear for decades. I was literally watching The West Wing a couple of weeks ago from whatever 20 plus 30 years ago, and they're talking about common sense gun legislation. So it was a hot topic back then, and there has been no appreciable movement on that since then, even though the population of the voting population overwhelmingly wants to see common sense gun reform. And so, like, how are we a representative democracy if that is true? And yet folks who are like, say that they bleed red, white, and blue are supporting the regimes that are like trying to keep that from happening. And the irony is just like outrageous.
That case in point is the gun lobby gives money to politicians, and sometimes, obviously, this particular issue is more of a Republicans get that money. There are some Democrats who get that money, but you could take any issue. There are plenty of issues that you would think that Democrats would care more about, climate, whatever, like pick your thing, but they get corporate money, and then they feel like, I'm trying to think of what the number was. It was like the average U.S. senator has to raise $45,000 a day for 6 years to run the campaign that they're going to have to run for re-election. And so if they're spending all of their time raising money, and the only place there's limits for what you and I could give. In terms of directly to the candidate. Now, obviously, we can give more to a PAC, et cetera, that kind of thing. But we don't have those kind of means. You know what I mean? Like, it's the wealthiest people that can give money to these PACs, and the corporations that can do that. And they're beholden to money. And we got to get that out of the politics.
In all these ways, right? We need to get back to the government that is like literally that was established, right? And part of that is protest, right? Part of that is like there's a day like Saturday, there's literally very few other more patriotic things that you can do than to go out, with your fellow citizens and tell the government exactly what it is that you expect from them. It's super, super, super patriotic, and it's always spun as like, you hate this country to do that kind of a thing, which is like the opposite of that. But there's so many examples of hypocrisy in all of this work.
It's so wild to me because well, I don't know. I don't remember if there was like a name for well, they call it the Boston Massacre now, but at the time, that's not when they went out there. That's not what they were calling it. They were hoping that wasn't going to happen. But Crispus Attucks was killed by British soldiers at a protest. Protest. That's how the American Revolution started.
Exactly.
It is in our blood and bones and DNA to protest when we don't think something is right. And that's the one thing that I always find funny is Republicans get kind of pissy when they've got somebody in office and Democrats or liberal people are protesting. It's like, you have the same right you
Yeah,
don't do it.
right.
Not that they never do, but I don't remember a whole lot of full-on protests during Joe Biden. There were some during the COVID issue, but that's about it.
There were none in Midland. Like, I
No,
cannot imagine the Midland County Republican Party like pulling off anything close to what we pulled off on
too
Saturday,
much work.
period. Um, so and like speaking of like protests and like the being patriotic and all of that, can you tell us about the 3.5% rule? I've read a couple of articles about that, but I think you probably a little more learned about all of that stuff. Like, tell us about what that's all about.
So the 3.5% rule came from Erica Chenoweth. They are a political scientist, professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. And they've just done a lot of research on nonviolent civil resistance and movements. They've written several books. I'm not going to list them all, but and they're working on more. But they recently have really been looking at like how, because it used to be like they said, oh, well, you got to have 5% of the population, or you're never going to get more than 5% of the population. But that was just an
5% of the
estimate.
population doing what? Going out to
Protesting,
protest? Okay.
yeah, actively protesting. So anyway, Erica actually went through the data from 1900 to 2006 across the world and looked at like 300 and some different situations around the world. And the number that they came up with was that no protest movement that got at least 3.5% failed of the population consistently protesting, failed to meet their objectives. And it didn't, some of them didn't even need that 3.5%. Some had a lower threshold. But some of them did require that much. But yeah, it's just this idea that a certain number of people and consistent, persistent protesting and being aware of the issue, the people will eventually get their way, is the idea. Now, they were actually on Pod Save America this weekend, which was recorded before the June 14th protest. So it was probably recorded, last week, whatever day last week. And so I felt so vindicated. I am going to have to read some of their work because it sounds pretty amazing. But I have been complaining about this, specifically Pod Save America, but some other podcasters or groups or whatever have said there haven't been enough protests. People are not getting out there in the streets and doing enough. Yeah. And like you and I, oh my gosh, we've been out there. So it's so frustrating to hear that. Well, Chenoweth said that they were wrong, that there has actually been more protests and more protesters in this first period of Trump's presidency than there was in his first presidency. So I feel vindicated because I've been saying that, and now Pod Save America knows it. So hopefully they'll stop.
Hopefully they'll stop saying that. I mean, so it might be true that the protests that are going on in this first months of the administration aren't getting the media coverage that they were getting before, or it might be true. I know it's true that these protests are not happening in Washington, D.C., right? Like they were before. And so the perception, I guess, because I've heard it too from Pod Save America, other podcasts too, like that there's just like the left doesn't care. We're just laying over and, playing dead or whatever. Maybe that perception is coming from like, all I'm looking at is Washington, D.C., and there's no protest. There's no million-person march on Washington, D.C., or we're looking at, mainstream media who is doing a terrible job of actually reporting the news these days and is like falling victim to the bullying that's going on by the administration. But they're not looking at the actual protests. And I heard somebody talk, it might have been Rachel Maddow or somebody talking about how important and different it is that the kinds of things that we're doing are focused locally. So it could be just 300 people in Clare. It could be 500 people in, Gladwin. It's 2,000 people in Midland. It's 7,000 people in Lansing or whatever. It's actually more powerful, more sustainable than 1 million people heading over to Washington, D.C., because it can involve
Mhm.
everybody. We already talked about access, right? Like it
Yeah.
can involve anybody, regardless of if you have the funds to get yourself to Washington, D.C., or the, ability to kind of do that kind of marathon of protest. And it's sustainable because, like, I can make the call Saturday morning if I can, rearrange my work schedule and show up to a protest versus planning it out months in advance or weeks in
Yeah.
advance and being able to go.
Mhm.
And it's also more visible, right? So, like, even if I'm not a person that's protesting, but I'm driving around, and once a month I notice that there is, a group of folks in my community out on the street corner,
Mhm.
then my perception, which is true, is like, man, this is everywhere. This is big, versus like maybe I happen to see, a news story about a bunch of folks in Washington, D.C. So the perception that, and this narrative that's out there, that's like the left is playing dead, we're not doing anything, is a bunch of BS.
Mhm.
Because we are, and actually we're doing it in a more effective way, and
Yeah.
we're better prepared this time around than we were, in the first administration. So I'm glad
Mhm.
to see like them getting called out for that,
Mhm.
because the actual data is meeting my perception, which is actually, it's bigger, it's more
Yeah.
widely spread than ever before.
And that's something that Chenoweth said, was that if you look at, there was 2,000 protests across the country on Saturday.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, there was like I want to say 100 in Michigan alone, but maybe it was
90 or
less than that.
something, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there was a lot in Michigan. And so like Fenton, that is a strong red area. They had 700 people. Gladwin, tiny little town up north, 150 people.
Wow.
Manistee in the UP, and I don't remember what their number was, but like
Yeah.
it's just, you have these protests in a place where people can see them, because one, you don't know if everybody's going to see it on the news. Like if it's in Washington, D.C., maybe they see it on the news, maybe they don't. But even if they do see it on the news, it's like, oh, that's those radical leftists in D.C., or
That's
those
right.
radical leftists that would travel all the way to D.C. Now it's your neighbor,
Yeah.
or your mom, or the person that owns the drugstore, or whomever. Like it's people, and you can't be as dismissive of who they are as people. They're not
Yeah.
radical leftists, they're your neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah. We ran into somebody yesterday who said that he saw the parent of one of his former students or something like
Yeah.
that, a decade or more later, and had no
Mm-hmm.
idea what their political ideology was, and was able to like make a connection that way, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad that the word is starting to get out, that, what we are doing is really huge and historic. Um, and it's not like rolling over dead,
Mm-hmm.
to what's going on at all. It definitely doesn't feel like it when we're working, the number of hours we're
We
spending.
are for
We
sure
might like
not
roll
rolling
over dead
over.
afterwards because we're
Yeah.
exhausted, but
I need a day to
yeah,
roll over and play dead.
yeah. For real. For real. Well, that's so good. That's so good. I'm so excited about it. I know that we're going to have more events, of course, and, we'll look to what's coming. But I also know that this last Saturday was intended to be like a big one, right?
Yeah.
So we have been doing small kind of other things on a regular basis, but this big one was really important, and it sounds like it really was like a huge success,
Yeah.
for all the reasons it needed to be. And like, part of what we talk about is kind of how you kind of start to build these coalitions and build this momentum in your local community, and especially if you're in a red area. And that's how, right? Like the 150 people in Gladwin is probably going to be 200 people next time, right? Because
Yeah.
enough people drove by and they're like, man, like next time I know about this, I'm going to totally join that. And
Mm-hmm.
getting to know those folks, and just the benefits of like hosting and organizing really safe and effective events like that can really like bolster like more them growing and shifting the narrative over time. And just like we said, like the Republicans in town are not going to be able to come anywhere close to pulling that off.
And I think they
And
had what?
yeah.
There was like 3 counter protesters, and they just stood there with their little Trump signs. And like by the time 2,000 people filed into this place, you couldn't even see them anymore.
Oh, I'm sure. And like if you were, if you had a strong Republican Party locally, you might stage something that was like some kind of, mirror of what was going on in DC that day, like an appreciation for the birthday of the, armed forces or whatever.
Yeah.
There's no way that that's going to happen. There's no way the energy's there, the momentum is there, the willingness to like literally put your body where your values are is not there. Like this is our lane. And if someone had asked 12 years ago, who has the power in Midland to stage the biggest rally in the history of our town, nobody would have said the Democratic Party.
No.
And it's because of all the work that we've been all doing together that with us, with the Democratic Party, with the Women of Michigan Action Network, our coalitions with other organizations locally, and then our connections to the national, like Indivisible and other places, really allow that to happen. And we should just be really proud of what we've been able to accomplish and the fact that it matters.
And our ability to be inclusive. I know we like touched on that a while ago, but I really do just want to go back to that. And that's kind of what my speech at the end of the protest was about, was just every time Trump has a victory, he gains power. And if he does something and nobody complains about it, nobody fights it, nobody does a lawsuit against it, he wins.
Yeah.
And he just gathers more power around himself. So the only way to stop that is to stand up every single time he does something we don't like. And that means standing up for every single person who is affected, whether we're talking veterans, disabled people on Medicaid, children, single moms, trans people, you name it. If Trump is going to trample them, we have to stand up and we have to show them that there is a place for them in our resistance.
Yeah. And I mean, that goes like toward the arguments of like, should we go more to the left or should we be more moderate? And it's like, we have to your point, like we have to stand up where we have to stand up, right? And here's the truth, like we're talking about actual humans when it comes to that level of inclusiveness. And so regardless, it's the best strategy, even if it wasn't, how can you not, right?
Yeah.
And still like sleep at night knowing that your values are intact. I don't know. There's lots of reasons to like make sure you're as inclusive as possible. You're focused in the right ways and you're creating that space for everybody to show up. Who knows, like if we hadn't had an element in this past event that included drag queens and like was a real like connection to the LGBTQ community, would we have had like such a diverse kind of group of folks who showed up? It's hard to tell, but I would guess not. So it all builds and it's all super important. For sure. All right. Well, we're just about at time, and I'm wondering if you've thought of a fun question.
I did, sort of.
Okay.
I have a feeling you don't have an answer to this one.
Oh, okay.
So I know that you're not a real sports person, but I'm wondering, is there any sport that you like? Any sport that you would play or watch?
That's such a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. I mean, I guess the real answer is not really, although I will say like I went to Michigan State, and so like, during like NCAA basketball tournament time, I'm medium interested in how how that team does, but mostly because I have my own personal connection to it. Of course, like my son plays tennis and I'm, kind of keyed into that. I also, during the Winter Olympics, I love short track ice racing. I think it's like so exciting to watch the like short track thing, but that's like every 4 years for like a hot second. So I guess the answer is no. And I know the answer on your end is the opposite of my answer.
Yes. We have a very sports oriented household, although I will say Craig and I both love just about any sport. I love baseball. I'm a huge Detroit Tigers fan. I love football. I'm a huge Detroit Lions fan. Detroit being the key there. Like when I hear people say like, I'm a fan of some other state, and I'm like, did you like live there? No, I just think they're a
I
cool
know, I
team.
don't get
How
that at
can you
all.
do that?
I don't
You
get
were
it. Yeah.
born here. Oh, that drives me nuts. But anyway, but yeah, like Summer Olympics, we got Peacock last summer because the Summer Olympics were on, and so we have to watch. Whatever. It's like whatever bullshit sport is on,
They'll put it
archery
on.
or shooting guns, or like,
Yeah.
watching that one guy from Turkey just be like, psh, 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 and like he hits everything and he doesn't even aim. And yeah, whatever sport comes on, we're watching it.
It's super funny. So during the Olympics last summer, we were in Italy for that family trip to Italy. And it was
Uh-huh.
so interesting to see what Italians, like we would turn on the TV. It was all in Italian, so we
Yeah.
couldn't understand what they were saying, but like we could see what they were showing. And it was not gymnastics. It was like not swimming. It was like archery and like those kinds of things. Like they would
Yeah.
spend a lot of time in fencing, like a whole
Oh,
day
wow.
of fencing going on, which was just like so interesting because you might get a little blurb of fencing in the
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
States, but like not like a whole day. So that was kind of cool to see like what
Hmm.
the different like cultural like interest was when it came to Olympic sports while we were
You
there.
named swimming and gymnastics, and those are the two biggest sports that my family watches because
Yeah.
two of my boys are swimmers. Craig is a swimmer.
Hmm.
And then my daughter, who is, she's turning 30 this July on the 4th. I can't even believe it. Um, but she was a gymnast. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we're huge fans of both of those.
Yeah, well, and those are kind of the two that get the most
Yeah.
airtime, really, here during the Olympics in the U.S., but not so much overseas, which is,
Hmm.
yeah, I just think that's
Probably because
interesting.
we dominate.
Right? Yeah, that's probably what it is. Like it's like
They're like, we don't want to watch that. The Americans are going to win anyway.
yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that tough question, Jennifer. And I hope you get some rest this week. I know we have things on the calendar for
We
sure, but
do.
not like the franticness of last week getting ready for that event. And
Yeah.
congratulations on a great event, and
Thank you.
I'm sure a great speech that you gave that day, and all of our other amazing speakers and organizers and volunteers and everyone who showed up. It's just so awesome. It's just so
And
awesome to see.
if anybody missed it and wants to see some of it,
Mhm.
we live streamed it on the Midland County Democratic Party's Facebook page and the Women of Michigan Action Network. And I assume you can fast forward through stuff too. So that
Cool.
way you don't have to watch. I think the whole first hour is just people marching.
Marching. Just people, which is like pretty cool. I love protest signs. I like have it's just like a
Yes.
special place in my heart for
Mm-hmm.
creative
Me too.
protest signs. So that just people marching might be my favorite part of everything. But
Mm-hmm.
awesome. All right. Well, until next time, it's good to see you. I hope you get some rest this week.
All right. Talk to
All
you
right.
later.
Take care.
Bye.